that break, and of course we are still live at Speak Munyonyo, and of course there is an ongoing East African Business Council summit that is going on, and of course it's scheduled to take place for just 2 days, today and tomorrow. And of course our theme of today, the private sector driven regional integration for increased inter-African trade and investment. Of course that is where our keynote speakers have been focusing on. And of course, one of the challenges that we've been facing in this highlighted was the non-tariff barriers. And of course, we are here to find out on ways and solutions on how we are going to find means of making sure that we cooperate as East Africa and of course Africa as a whole. And of course, emphasis has been made on the African Continental Free Trade Area. And of course, we have a little bit of challenges, like the Deputy Prime Minister actually emphasized on. And of course, some countries are still, a little bit strained, but of course, with time, we shall hope that everything will be perfect. And of course, behind me, of course, there is a going panel that is coming up. And of course, there's going to be discussions on different matters relating to business. And of course, today we are focusing on SMEs, women in the business regarding Africa and of course, East Africa as a region.
To show the slides for my presentation. Try and provide you with a view that I have here. From an East African point of view, first thing I'd like to talk about is where do we stand from a macroeconomic point of view, geopolitical point of view. 7 countries now make up the Federation of the East African Community, and we're looking to admit 2 more members at least. And hopefully we'll have a 3rd member in the name of Ethiopia and be a formidable economic bloc. Total population we've had is about 300 million, give or take. Again, statistics in our part of the world can be a bit of a moving target, but you'll bear with me and please do not ask. I can see my colleagues from RSM, don't ask me for the sources and for evidence. I'm not able to stand by all of it. Our GDP stands in the region of $325 billion. With an average growth of about 5.5% for the last financial year. FDI inflows, FDI foreign direct investment ebbs and flows, depending on the season, depending on the projects that are going on at the moment. So the last data that we've seen suggests a fairly low figure of about $5.8 billion, but which is still about 2% of our GDP for the region. FDI foreign direct investment is very important for economic growth. Studies have shown that is one of those that provide a significant multiplier, a very important multiplier to economic growth. And I think it's not just the dollars that we look at, it's also the expertise that it brings, it's the technology that it brings, it is the innovation that it brings that we typically will benefit from when we have FDI. In terms of ease of doing business, there have been some statistics that we should not be proud about, which is the Corruption Perceptions Index, as well as the indices from Transparency International. Again, we don't do very well at all. Those things do not augur well for an investment climate. They don't augur well for being able to grow economies. So what have we achieved so far within the East African community? We've already had that over the last few years, the community, we've managed to double intra-regional trade from about 12% to about 24%. Again, difficult to measure, different sources provide different statistics, but I think the figure of about 20%, 24%, I'll take the ES's version of it to be reasonable. We've also had highlights in terms of regional integration of capital markets. A number of our equities are listed across East Africa, across different stock markets, allowing our equity markets to develop even further. We've done a number of things, a lot of those that you'll be aware of. One-stop border post is something that has been quite instrumental in reducing the amount of time that it takes for cargo to cross borders. We've got a common market with free quote-unquote movement of goods. But again, there are still some quotes around the freedom of movement of goods and labor, but certainly we are seen as a very good model across the African continent. We've also seen some attempts around infrastructure. SGR has not quite worked out as well as we wanted it to. but we can certainly see the East African crude oil pipeline being a significant cross-border project, as well as joint power project successful. We do have a customs union, we do have legislation, as Ms. Fiona spoke to us earlier on this morning, with East Africa being seen to be a leading light in legislation for the region. So some great stuff has been done in that area. However, there are opportunities for us to deepen our free trade area. The best-in-class free trade areas that we know about in trade area, the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. And they've got a deeper, much deeper integration that we do have, and that has allowed them to, one, maximize the value and volume of trade within the region, and number two, it also helps them to integrate within global value chains. Now, we do have a lot of competing theories. We've gone from things like import substitution to export-led growth, to integration, as well as very nationalistic policies such as Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. Local content, national content, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you don't actually quite know what we're really doing, but I think all of that is to try and answer the question of how fast can we grow our economies and provide and grow the wealth and prosperity of our people. Global value chains have been shown to be instrumental in the growth and development of nations. The most recent example and best example that is unquestioned is China. But what do they need for that to happen? They'll typically need a manufacturing hub. So China provided that for the North and South America. Within East Africa and within Africa at large, we still lack that hub. A country that has got a significant share of high-end manufacturing that would allow us to tap into global value chains. We believe somehow that if we make products and shall automatically be able to sell them in Western markets, so high-end income markets. It doesn't necessarily quite work like that. Think about those of you that are holding an iPhone, those of you that flew into Uganda by air. The airplane that you flew in, it might have been made in Brazil, might have been made in Canada or the US or Europe. But where are the components made? And how many times do they traverse between geographies before they end up in that airplane? So the iPhone is designed, of course, in California, has got some components made in the US, some components are made in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, everything else is made in China. The iPhone 14, the current series of iPhone, had sold in the quarter one of this year 37 million units. 37 million. That is in one quarter. Now you project that over an entire year and you're heading towards a number close to 200 million units being sold around the world. And if you assume that half of that value stays in the US, and assuming an average sales price of $1,000, you do the maths. You're talking about $100 billion from one product. And that says many things. And Steve Jobs was quoted speaking to President Obama when he was being put under pressure to bring more jobs back to the US. Said, you can't make the iPhone in the US. Chinese factories will turn around a design change in 2 weeks. They'll change an entire production line so that they can accommodate a design change within 2 weeks. You cannot do that in the US. They'll open and shut down production lines at will. You cannot do that in the US. And therefore, global value chains are such an important and acknowledged way in for us as Africans to consider how we can develop and grow our countries. This discussion, the Africa Free Trade Area came up in 2018, and I believe in the same year, we had a talk in Uganda, an economic summit organized by the Nation Media Group. And the keynote speaker then did mention and said, look, we're in Ethiopia as a Chinese firm making leather goods, not because Ethiopia has got access to good leather, not because Ethiopia has got access to, simply because Ethiopia has got cheap labor, but we're making these shoes and exporting them to Europe and to the US and making a lot of money delivering value to Ethiopia as well as to our Chinese owners. So global value chains is something I would like us to take away from this particular discussion as a key ingredient in trying to unlock trade and investment. Our region has a lot to offer, but I'll now move on to the next slide around challenges and for trade and investment within the ESC. Again, this is why I believe that I'm preaching to the converted. We all live and breathe these challenges. So from multiple currencies and language, we have issues. If you're based here in Uganda, which is probably one of the most central parts of the community, you realize that to your east, language communication will be easy. To the south, it will be easier. To the west, it's a different story. To the north, it's a different story. Complexity, so foreign currencies come into play, as well as exchange rate volatilities. This year alone, because of the depreciation eventually of the Kenya shilling, we've seen a lot of value being eroded from investments in Kenya alone. We do have issues around payments. We've had a lot of improvements around payment systems and a degree of integration of payment systems led by the private sector. However, we still have a lot of issues around that. Taxation is what it is. Again, we all live and breathe taxation. If you're in Uganda today, you can guarantee you're going to receive an SMS at least once a day asking you to pay taxes, some of which are not your taxes, but the message still comes. Together with additional entries to say, your tax bill was supposed to be 100 million, but please pay 2 billion. So people are spending a lot of time trying to explain and defend why that is not actually their tax position. So that our tax regimes are complex. I have seen a preview of the presentation that will be dealing with tax harmonization. It is crazy, just wrapping one's head around what are the different taxes I'm supposed to pay. And when you believe you've understood that and actually paying, somebody comes along and says, you must pay more. In fact, you're hiding. So the administration of taxes is a big challenge. Double taxation is another area. For goods, it's easier to deal with, to eliminate double taxation. For services, it's a nightmare. So if you provide services and share resources, for example, in our environment between countries, you're finding yourself adding as much as 50% to the cost of those services to your clients because of VAT, withholding tax, VAT on exports, none of which is recoverable, and that makes it impossible for us to have skills transferred from one of the member countries to another member state. We do have double tax treaties between Uganda and the Netherlands and Mauritius and South Africa and other countries, but not with Kenya, our most important trading partner, for example. So those are some of the issues that require to be addressed. Infrastructure, where do I begin, where do I end? I think we'll understand the challenges around infrastructure, and perhaps we don't need to go to town about that. On the next slide, perhaps the most important challenge that we're facing, that is facing our community and has already been alluded to this morning, is the issue of non-tariff barriers. Having established a common external tariff, having established a customs union, we have gone and done that work by implementing non-tariff barriers. And the Deputy Prime Minister has spoken to that very eloquently, and I will not say much more about that. But you can't expect taps to be turned on and off. A company creates a capacity, understanding a market, particular market, and you create capacity and suddenly you're asked to turn it off. It is very, very destabilizing. Bans on specific products are also very destabilizing. I think the good news is that so far the community, the East African community, has been able to eliminate more than 200 non-tariff barriers in the last 5 or so years. The interesting thing, however, is that much of this has been achieved, according to the EAC, through head of state dialogue, not because of our bureaucracy, not because of our East African community. And that says a lot about the bureaucracy that we have in place. Our customs procedures are what they are. They've improved quite a lot. You can now move goods between Mombasa, for example, and Kampala in a week. It used to take 3 to 4 weeks to do that, but a week is still a long time. Customs clearance, despite the fact that we have one-stop border posts, we still find that the checks are still cumbersome. Every single truck has got to be checked, and so on and so forth. And to give us a flavor of how much of a nuisance this is and why we need to deal with it, during COVID, the European Union issued a directive to say all cross-border goods, cargo, must be cleared within 15 minutes, including health checks. So you can do everything that you want, but they must be cleared within 15 minutes. 15 minutes, right? try and do, I mean, we were, if a minor incident happens at Malaba or Busia, between the border for Uganda and Kenya, you'll have a traffic building up for more than 5 kilometers because of somebody. One truck has been held up or 2 trucks have had an issue, and suddenly nobody can move. In fact, an IMF study shows that beyond country-specific issues, okay, of the tax burden we place on businesses. If you think about a manufacturer that produces any good that you want to think about, what is the net profit margin in manufacturing on average? It will vary, but we might talk about maybe 10%. Out of that, so that is the money for every $100 sold by a manufacturer, $10 goes to the owner. But out of that $100, how much has gone to the government? At least $18 goes to on VAT alone. Another portion goes to pay as you earn. Another portion goes to income tax. By the time you're done, a typical business is paying 30 to 40 or more % of their earnings to government. Even when there's no income tax to be paid, there's still a substantial contribution being made to the coffers. That is not appreciated and understood. And there's a view that businesses are always looking to cheat. That approach to administering taxes is a major is a major constraint upon growth of trade, but it's also a constraint upon attracting investment into our region. The legal frameworks are a challenge. The traditional East African countries, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, had a common British Commonwealth or imperial heritage, therefore the legal systems are generally similar. However, once we bring on board DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, South Sudan, the legal systems change, and therefore that creates a constraint upon how we do business, how we understand the rules of the game. We've had issues around the respect for the rule of law. Again, the DPM alluded to that. We've had issues in Uganda, for example, where contract enforcement borrowings have been challenged in court successfully, and it has taken superior courts, it has taken the court in the United Kingdom to overturn some of those decisions. Again, things that don't augur well for investments, attracting investments into our region. Rules and regulations, what passes for acceptability in one country may not be acceptable in another country. Standards enforcement in one geography are not consistent, and that has led to issues. For example, Uganda, maize in Kenya, genuine issues to do with toxins in the maize, toxification of our produce. But where are the rules, where are the regulations, and how do we make sure that we avoid all of that at source? On the next slide, talk a little bit about investment requirements and how can we unlock the potential of the economic bloc. Again, just a few ideas. We know that we're operating in an environment of very young populations across the region. More than 40% of our populations are under the age of 18 within the East African community. We also have increased life expectancy. That creates demands. If we're going to industrialize, we're going to need highly skilled workforces. Those require investments in education. Healthcare needs to improve. You can't work unless if you're not healthy. But we're not spending enough on education. We're not spending enough on healthcare. We've got a huge natural resources endowment. It requires a lot of money to be invested in. A lot of those natural resources are in huge demand, and we understand that that then provides a massive opportunity for us within the region and a significant investment opportunity. Infrastructure, again, the less said, the better. It is evident and all plain to see. And I want to say that the power of infrastructure is so significant, and the most recent example is Nairobi. Those of you that are living in Nairobi, those of you that have visited Nairobi in the last year or so, will have seen the transformation by just doing a few roads around Nairobi. How easy it has made. So the trip to the airport and back from the airport used to take 2 hours easily. It is now 20 minutes from anywhere in the center of anywhere in Nairobi city to get to the airport. And not just that, but also areas out of Nairobi have also been made very accessible. Access to finance. In terms of the private sector, again, this has already been mentioned as an issue. Our capital markets are developing, but are still very poorly developed. From an Africa context, the total value of our stock markets in East Africa is 3.5% for Africa alone. And yet our population is within 20-25% of the total African population. We're clearly punching way below our weight. That creates a constraint on access to capital and therefore investment and trade. High cost of funding, insufficient products, depth and breadth. Around March or April this year, there was a story coming out of the US that the corn is maize, same as maize. The maize crop in the US was already seen was going to be much lower than expected. In some places by as much as half. And they knew that. And they knew that 3 or 4 months ahead of harvest. So much so that insurance companies are already moving in to start to evaluate the losses that need to be compensated under the crop insurance schemes. So much so that farmers already knew they no longer need to pay attention to those crops. And they must now be thinking about alternative ways of using that crop because it will not be suitable for human consumption. It will not be viable. So now being converted for animal feed and other bits and pieces. So the lack of development of our financial systems can be a significant constraint to trade. It makes it difficult for us to survive shocks and short-term disruptions. I've already mentioned the small size of our economies. I've also mentioned the insufficient development of our manufacturing capacity, which then means that how can we tap into whether or not we've got raw materials, whether or not we've got cheap labor, how can we tap into global value chains when we simply haven't demonstrated that capacity to manufacture to high standards? If you look at the EU, the largest portion of trade within the EU is manufactured items. The largest portion is around automotives, it's around cars and things of that nature. So there's a lot to be said in terms of us being able to build up that manufacturing capacity. Brief reflection on the next slide on what CEOs are most concerned about within East Africa. What are the key worries? So inflation is top of mind. Macroeconomic volatility, which is closely related to inflation, ranked second. And then you got risks around cyber, climate change, geopolitical conflict, health, and social inequality. We've done a family business survey, and that survey is interesting because if you compare the results for Uganda, East Africa, to the rest of the world, in many respects, they look fairly similar, surprisingly. Because, family businesses in South Africa, for example, include such major groups such as the Oppenheimer family and others. So we don't really have a comparison that is like for like. In places like Germany, there are some huge family business empires. But the results were fairly similar, except one statistic that really stands out. That's taxation and tax administration. And that, again, says quite a bit. My final slide is around recommendations. If you allow me, and I humbly request allow me to make some recommendations. On the next slide, please. One is harmonization of regulations and policies. We know the difficulty that we face due to the lack of harmonization of what is the standard that we should be following and how should that standard be enforced across the region. Number 2 is infrastructure development. Without access to good roads, rail, air transport, marine transport, you simply cannot do intra-regional trade. We've talked about the issue of there are no trucks lined up from Katuna to West Africa. Question is, where would you pass, right? There has been talk for years about Cape to Cairo, a road network from Cape Town to Cairo. That has been talked about certainly for more than 70 years. We still cannot get from Uganda to Cairo. We can't get from Uganda to the Cape. We can, but it's simply not convenient enough. Cooperation between customs authorities, we need to lift customs inefficiencies. One of the things that Europe is comfortable about is that they've got transparency of their value chain, so they know. Yesterday was the International Day of Tomatoes in Spain, and they pelt each other with tomatoes for 2 hours. Tomatoes can be grown and harvested in Spain this morning and end up on a supermarket shelf in Scotland the next day, because the road network exists. And there's a matter of getting them onto a truck and getting them across that distance. So that is such an important constraint that should we focus on. But there are also part of it is infrastructure costs a lot of money and time, but bureaucracy doesn't. We can change that quickly. We can change that in an instant. PPPs, again, I think that requires little explanation. Legal frameworks around investor protection and promotion. We're doing a lot of investor promotion, but we're not investing enough in investor promotion. Our investment promotion agencies are not necessarily well funded, and as a result are struggling to attract investment with the level that we would like. Regional value chains, I've already spoken to that to an extent. The one point that I'd like to spend a bit more time in is around research and development. How much research and development are we doing within East Africa? We'd like to commend the East African community for setting up a research fund. And it would be nice to hear from them in terms of how well that has been tapped into and realized. Most of the research we do in our universities is done for Western companies. And it goes all the way back to those Western companies. So the lack of integration between our manufacturers and our research bodies is a significant constraint to us being able to innovate, improve our products, and improve the way that we do business. There are some examples of innovation. Again, we may have different views about some of them, but there have been some attempts, and I wanted to highlight the issue of COVIDex. During the COVID pandemic, we were told that there's a cure in Madagascar. Then we were told there's a cure. Some gentleman showed up in Uganda with a heart. He said that the cure didn't quite happen. But the most effective treatment for COVID in Uganda was a herbal treatment developed in Uganda. And of course, at first we didn't believe in it. But I think it's to say that where the appropriate research is undertaken, it is possible for us to actually develop solutions to our problems. There is an example of equity that I would encourage you to look at. And I didn't do this because I was expecting Dr. James Mwangi to be on the panel. The question I was asking myself is, how much are we spending? So the top 5 companies in East Africa are Safaricom, Equity, Tanzania Breweries, KCB, and I forget the 5th one. And my question was, how much are they spending on R&D? And how do they do it? And how can we understand that R&D? And Equity Bank offers some very good examples, because 20 years ago it was a building society serving less than 1 million customers. And today it's a bank, it's a group, it's across the East African community other than in Burundi, and serving millions of customers. It is now the most profitable bank in Kenya, and so on and so forth. Cost-income ratio is below 50%. For a bank with roots in microfinance, where normally the cost of service are high, how have they done that? Technology is a big part of that. Research into what products need to be developed, how they need to be developed, was undertaken, and that has informed their journey. And they have led in some respects for a regional bank, for an indigenous bank, quote unquote, as opposed to some of our equally innovative, more innovative banks, but which have a benefit of having a global presence. But the point here is to say it's not just the spend on R&D, it's the quality of that spend that will determine the future for our trade and investment within East Africa. I thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uthman Mayanja. As you're sitting, probably allow me to ask you a question while my panelists are preparing themselves for their questions. If you look from, and because PwC has a global perspective, continental perspective, from the FDI perspective, from foreign direct investment, what do you think or you perceive to be the comparative advantage of this region?
Thank you very much. I think the first point we must remind ourselves is that international investors have got many options. The East African community is simply one of many regions in which their money can be invested. And it's also seen as a higher risk destination. And that is why every time we have a shock, either at the global level or within the regional level, we see an extraction of capital. So what are the things that make us attractive? One of them is our population dynamics. Our region has got a young population, well educated, and in some cases multilingual as well. So that is a significant attraction, that you can get access to skills and get access to labor within the region. What they also look for quite often is policy consistency. Sometimes investors don't worry so much about whether or not the policies are great, but it's knowing whether the policies will be maintained. One of the things, however, when it comes to policies that has helped the region, has been around free movement of capital. And in fact, talking to some people are saying, is it too free? Is it too much? That, it doesn't matter how much money you bring in, how much money you make, you can take it all out in some of our countries without anybody asking questions. But the ability to bring money in and take it out when you need it is a significant advantage, and I think it's one that we can't afford not to have, simply because we are competing with so many other regions, Latin America, Central and Eastern Europe, Asia, and so on and so forth, continue to offer massive investment opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Uthman. My sister Annette. We have heard this morning and this afternoon that the region enjoys decent economic growth, averaging 5% or above. But that could be more. It's hampered by some factors, some challenges, whether it's infrastructure, whether it is low productivity in agriculture, etc. So as EAC, what are the strategic actions or strategic thinking that you have in place to navigate through those obstacles to ensure that the region grows even faster?
Thank you very much. And I also want to recognize and thank our keynote speaker for his presentation and the thoughts and recommendations that he has shared. I want to respond to a couple of the issues that you spoke to before I respond to your question. One, specifically on customs, and customs as one of the key institutions for purposes of facilitating trade. I want to acknowledge a lot of work that has gone into modernization of customs processes and systems, and that we have moved a very, very long way from what the situation was a number of years ago. Many customs processes have been improved. We have connectivity of customs across the region. We have modern application of modern technology, for example, through our regional cargo tracking systems. We have scanners at border points. We have officers from the different revenue authorities stationed at ports to ensure flow of goods. So I think as we continue to explore innovations for customs improvements, let's also recognize all the hard work that has gone into those improvements, and also we look forward to advise on what else we need to do in a very tangible way as we look at the systems that have been put in place. On NTBs, that's a really important matter that we continue to reflect on. There are systems in place to monitor removal of NTBs. In one of the discussions we had early this week, we were asked a very challenging question. Why do we even have an institutional framework for removal of NTBs? There shouldn't be NTBs at all. So we can't pride ourselves in having NTB removal committees. They shouldn't exist. And I think that's a matter we are going to be reflecting on. And together through this technical working group that was just launched, those are key issues that we want to focus on. On the question that you just posed on some of the strategic interventions, you will recall that the heads of state at one of their retreats prioritized a list of 286 regional projects in diverse sectors, including in the railways, in ports, roads, energy, and airports, for development over a 10-year period. And this is mainly to bridge the infrastructure gap that you raised. And of these, at least 17 projects were identified as high priority, whose development is meant to be fast-tracked. And the Council is deliberating continuously around these issues to make sure they are prioritized, to ensure that resources are made available to deliver these projects. Once delivered, the infrastructure challenge will be addressed in some ways. Of course, border posts have been improved. A number of major roads are under construction in the different partner states to lead to connectivity of the region. Infrastructure projects, as you mentioned, as the keynote speaker mentioned, are very expensive projects, and they take a long time to deliver. I think it's that commitment that resources that are needed are made available to move forward these projects. There's also the issue of agricultural productivity, and we all agree that the region depends very heavily on the agriculture sector, whose contribution is somewhere between 20 to 40%, depending on the country. And the challenges remain, but there are a number of strategic interventions that are being discussed and prepared at a regional level. For example, the Agriculture Input System Development Program, which aims to facilitate harmonization of agricultural inputs, policies, and regulations. There's also an intervention to mainstream the regional aflatoxin prevention and control strategy, allocating of funding to aflatoxin mitigation, a number of guidelines that have been developed. So there's really a lot that is in the pipeline. You will also be aware of the Competition Authority that is also key in ensuring accountability and fairness in doing business and leveraging the business environment. The keynote speaker mentioned research, and I also want to bring to your attention the role of the Science and Technology Commission in ensuring that there's a research agenda that contributes to innovation, helps in identifying key research priorities for the region, and ensuring the availability of funding to deliver those priorities. I hope that's just a flavor of many other issues that we could talk about.
Thank you so much. I'll come back to you. Sanjay, my brother, maybe you can also start with your reflection on what Uthman has said in his presentation. And then you can also take us through your thoughts and ideas, especially because of your very strong background from financial sector, being the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank here in Uganda, previously CEO in Tanzania. Where Uthman has talked about issues around currency availability, especially availability of dollars, the impact of COVID, and the disruption that has caused in industry, manufacturing sector, the disruption that has caused in service, etc. What do you think could be done to mitigate some of these challenges? So your overall reflection, but also specifically on financial sector, what kind of mitigants can we think of to ensure economic stability of the region?
Good. I think whilst we had some bites, we are standing in between lunch, yeah? But I think Uthman has spiced up the conversation. I actually think we should have started the day with Uthman speaking so that our chief guest should have been listening to what Uthman said. Since John asked me about my reflections, I think many of you know that I am Tanzanian. And my reflections actually took me down memory lane. You know, about 45 years ago, when I used to cross into Uganda, Kenya, I thought things were so much more easy. And then my father said, you know, there is this amazing East Africa cooperation that is coming up. And the big question was, so when East Africa cooperation comes in, what changes? And the whole idea was it's going to be so much more easy. I can tell you 40 years later, it is so much more hard. And I think Uthman brought a lot of clarity to that. Since you're talking about reflection, I also found it very challenging that as a leader and a very big private sector advocate, I think the whole game of collaboration needs to change when we talk about making sure trade, investment, collaboration, cooperation, all those things work. And three things came to mind. I think number one is Uthman brought a very significant clarity to all of us. He said business. We don't really understand business. Everybody who stops business should be punished. You know, we need to first make sure if you don't understand business, you should not be doing that job. You know, maybe we should change our job descriptions to say that everybody who is recruited, you know, needs to have the test of business, you know, which is very critical. I think the other thing is that everybody who is involved in trade and investment needs to change the definition of the border. Why is the border Kenya? And why is the border Tanzania? And why is the border Uganda? For everybody in the job who is trying to facilitate trade and investment within our region, the standard border for them should be East Africa. Then they stop the bureaucracy. You know? Why are we talking about European business models and Asian business models? Because they embrace that as the border. Surely nobody else should be talking about any other borders. Everybody else should be unlocking those borders. And I think maybe we all need to have a crash course on how to tackle bureaucracy. Because as Uthman said, that is free. You know, so it's very, very free. So I hope that in the next couple of days we are going to bring more clarity to that. So sorry, John, it took me into very deep thinking, but it also took me into thinking that maybe we have some of our fundamentals wrong. Now, your question about foreign currency. I think, you know, clearly we all are going through a very difficult phase in history when it comes to foreign currency, particularly in our region. But it is good to recognize that the issues we face in East Africa are not homogeneous. That means they're not the same, and they're not to the same magnitude. You know, the issues we face in Kenya are very different to the shortages we face in Tanzania. And frankly, we don't have shortages in Uganda, you know, because it's an open market model. Now, I'm not saying one model is different or better to the other model. I think what is critical is, one, we have a perennial business model which is very focused on living on imports, so it's never too sustainable. We have all this bureaucracy and challenges, and we have a lot of trade barriers when it comes to exports, so that balance has been an issue. We've only focused on commodities. We're all commodity-led markets. We've never diversified. I think Uthman talked about how do we create competitive industrialization. And if we think industrialization is best or manufacturing is best to be done in Kenya, then we should all put efforts and make that to be the manufacturing hub. And maybe Uganda becomes the agriculture hub because you can grow anything here. And maybe Rwanda becomes a technology hub. If we start thinking about borders that way, there are different ways of doing business. But I think that I'm trying to highlight that with the models we have, which are historic, you know, our issue about resilience is always going to be questioned or challenged. We're also not making human resources, you know, a big part of investment. If you look at Singapore, India, some of the European countries, really human resources is the biggest flow of money. And then we have all these immigration laws, you know, which doesn't recognize diaspora. So when you don't recognize diaspora well, to bring in financing into your own countries, FDIs. So there are some perennial issues that we need to really focus on. But bringing it to the reality around why is a few countries in East Africa constrained? I think the reality is COVID. You know, many of our markets are very driven by tourism as a very key aspect of doing business, and that struggled. We also struggled in exports. You know, the whole supply chain was a big issue. And, you know, when an investor finds an alternate source, when supply chain is disrupted, then they stick to an alternate source which is more efficient. And remember, that is a time when many markets understand business so that they make good decisions very quick. Whilst we are thinking about the supply chain, they are thinking about business. So there is a big difference there. I think the third thing is really that with the way the world is at the moment, with high inflation, interest rates growing, our outflows by nature, given that we are a debt market, as Asif spoke in the morning, that we need to look at debt, our debt continues to grow, whether you like it or not. With every 0.25% increase in the world, our outflows grow. And I think we need to have that clarity of that outflow and how can we have the inflow. The other thing is really around, we are not prepared for risk. We many times are blessed, by the way, we're blessed by great weather, great natural environment. So I think we count our blessings on everything. We've got to become better with risk management. Othman spoke something very amazing about, the shortage of, is it maize in some part of America, and how they were planning like months ahead. I mean, what we are facing now, we were always going to face. Did we really plan? Are we really effective now? So risk management needs to change. And I think the whole discussion of why East Africa should be an investment destination is a $1 million question for all of us. I mean, if we had to all invest a little bit more, I know as Standard Chartered Bank why I will invest and in which areas, but I still find a lot of questions. It is a very hard sell for me being in Uganda for 111 years to still sell Uganda. So then what's the problem? So I think what I'm saying is that, there are many ways through which we can start mitigating. We need to think about this as a long-term problem. So what do we say? We need to grow exports. We need to make sure that we look at all our imports and say, what can be locally produced? And again, I want to say locally means the bigger border of East Africa, not your own country. We also need to improve trade facilitation, bureaucracy, many things. And I know my sister here said, let's recognize. So I'm recognizing that the platforms we have created and the structures we have created can only be effective if the mindset is created. And I think that's the bigger block that we need to solve. We cannot forget that there is the whole thing about, if I was a head of East Africa, I would say, why do you buy anything from outside East Africa? That should be the big question. Anything that you import from somewhere else should be a big question for all of us. So how do we make the most out of East Africa? I think the other thing is I touched on human capital. East Africa has the best youth population that the world has. How do we optimize on that? A lot of countries are looking for shared services models. The accountants here, RSM, etc. will tell you. You can actually create amazing shared services. We speak English and really make this the spot where through cheaper labor, we can get more foreign currency. I think finally is roadshows. My brother Uthman spoke about, we don't even know how to control our narrative. The whole world controls our narrative. Uganda like this, Kenya like this, Tanzania like this, East Africa like this. How do we become bold in controlling our narrative? How do we sell East Africa? If there are hundreds of us here today and we asked all of us, tell me 5 things about East Africa, we'll all have different answers. Why? Our PR is lacking ambition. We've got to get to a commonness ground. And I think finally there is this thing called sovereign rating. If you look at all the markets, I think some are there a little bit stable, but most of us are showing very negative trends. Now, to an investor who is looking at the world where there is investment opportunity, these things matter. So how are you tackling that sovereign challenge where you're categorized as negative? We have the gray listing issues, we've got to tackle them. But I think foreign currency requires many things to be looked at so that they can be solved. So John, a big answer to my reflections on foreign currency. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay. Thanks a lot. Now, allow me to invite 2 or 3 comments. The director of ceremonies has already alerted me that there's a next panel coming. But if 1 or 2 participants have something that they would like to contribute to a quick question, and again, my plea, it has to be brief, not more than a minute of a question or a comment. I'm not sure if we have microphones that can move around. People at the back helping us with audios. Do we have wireless microphones? Nobody's even shaky.
And John, whilst we are getting the microphone, I also forgot, since we have all the bosses of East Africa here, can we make sure that the trade in East Africa is settled in local currency within East Africa?
Perfect.
You know, why do we need dollars? Yeah.
Microphones, please. First, a lady over here, another lady over there, and then a gentleman and a lady. And then, so just, yeah. She's already standing just, and then another microphone over there. First, young lady. Yes, Karibu.
Okay, I start by thanking God so much. Thank you so much, the organizers, all protocols observed. It is unfortunate our minister has gone, but all of you here, you can hear me very well and do something. May I start with the challenges? I've been attending all the East African high-level summits in East Africa. I'm so grateful those who have tried to solve some of the problems, challenges we have, but we still have a road. The first one, I want us to like ourselves. Somebody commented that the Europeans develop very fast, but Africans, we hate ourselves. I will not be surprised if this dinner cocktail has no African product. I have the best wine in the whole world. I didn't get any.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll drink your wine. Thank you so much, lady.
Thank you so much. Also now, another thing, very briefly, taxes. To know that we hate ourselves, I have tried to develop East Africa, but I've been leveraged a lot of taxes to bring me down. I get a profit on this bottle, the lovely bottles you have seen outside, are 500, they want 6,000 on every bottle. I have tried to share my 500 with them. Now it is a tune of 1 billion they want me to pay. Soon they're coming to close.
So tax issue.
I'm so glad that the ED solved the problem in Rwanda, where I opened the company. I wanted to start manufacturing. Problems came in, COVID came in. I found a lot of taxes. But thanks to ED is solving that. Taxes where I had never done any business. The border was closed. How could I find when I'm in Uganda and it is in Rwanda?
Point is noted. Thank you so much.
Let me stop there for a while.
Yes, thank you. I'm inviting another participant. Thanks a lot.
Hi, I'm Brigette Harrington with the Jury Coffee
I'll be a bit unkind with time. Okay, please go ahead.
I'm Brigette Harrington with the Jury Coffee Company. And there were a couple things, and I think one of the first things that we have to take into consideration is changing the narrative. And I think I heard that stated earlier. When we talk about sending products from one country to another country, it's okay. I spoke with a young lady earlier about the products she's selling here, which are fine for this market. But when you start talking about crossing the border to go into another market, then it's imperative that a couple of things happen. What's on the shelves from Europe, from America, from Canada are on the shelves, and we have to compete with that. And so it's imperative that we change the narrative around the indigenous products that are being made. And in changing the narrative, we also need to make sure that our products are meeting international standards and that they are of the same quality or superior quality, to include the packaging and the labeling. So those are two things. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is uniform regulations. Uniform regulations in terms of your standards authorities. So as you'll all find out later, I exported coffee from Rwanda to Ghana under the Guided Trade Initiative. I had the coffee certified in Ghana because I knew that's where I was sending it. Then when I got back to Rwanda, I got a call from Rwanda Standards Board that said, well, you have not had your coffee certified here. And so I said, well, it's been certified where I was exporting it to. And they said, oh, but you have to have it certified here. I said, okay, well, let me bring all of the paperwork from Ghana, and I'll bring it to you, and then you should be able to issue certification in Rwanda. So I brought all of the paperwork from Ghana Standards Authority, from Food and Drug Authority in Ghana, and they said, oh no, we have to retest everything. And by the way, it costs more in Rwanda to test than it does in Ghana. So I'm, as we say in Ghana, I'm begging, oh, please, get these people on the same page in terms of certification, because I should not have to pay to have the product certified in one country inside of AFCFTA and then turn around and have it certified in each country that I send product to.
Mutual recognition. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Chair, does that mean...
Thank you, Chair.
Does that mean that the test buds of the Ghanaians are different from the Rwandans?
Yes.
And the testing must be in tandem with the different tests of the different versions of black people, right?
The Commissioner for Customs from Rwanda is looking at you like, where are you going with this?
No, I just want to understand this.
So you see the MC now is standing. Please, not more than a minute. Welcome, madam.
My name is Victoria Sektoreko, and I'm from the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. I want to thank all the presenters, but specifically I want to thank Mr. Sanje, because you are the one who specifically mentioned the youth. Coming from a region where 70% of your people are youth, we sit here and we somehow forget that they are there. You all put emphasis on infrastructure, and you gave examples, the roads, the ports, the airports, and all that. What part of that does the youth use? Recently, I'll be specific. Recently, we had a concert here organized by Uganda. Boys to Men from the US came here with South Souls from Kenya. Finding a venue to perform was a nightmare, because Boys to Men wanted to perform inside. Uganda does not have that type of infrastructure. Then after that, we had Afrigo and Awilo Lagomba from DRC. I was there. When Lagomba came to the stage, everybody stood up. I was like, what is happening here? There's the Lagomba. But eventually, when he had the moment to talk, he was complaining about how difficult it is to come and make us happy. Now, East Africa, you have got these youths. They are an asset. When we have these important meetings, can we make them important? That is one. Two, what areas are they? The youths are in innovation, creative, and entertainment. But do you know that it is so difficult? I remember one time there is a singer from Tanzania called Platinum. Apparently when he was coming, finding space for him was such a problem. Then they started bringing in spousal affairs and all that. This was business. So while we are all older, the children are asking, where can they play?
Thank you. That is well noted. Unfortunately, I will have to take... I see you, my sister Jen, but I'll only have to invite this young man from here. Otherwise, the MC will not be happy with me.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Michael from the U.S., and I'm a movie producer here in Uganda, new here in Uganda. And I have just a very specific question, especially with what this woman said. I don't know your name, and her here with the changing the narrative. Movie production is extremely important everywhere. We all know that the U.S., when you want somebody to save you, Superman comes out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Who saves our Ugandan children? What is the image that we put, and how can all of the investors in this room assure that movie production is a big part of the future of Uganda? Sanji, you said that if you were the leader of East Africa, how would you make movie production a part of East Africa?
Excellent question. There are like 10 hands in the room, but unfortunately I will not take any. I'm sorry. I want to give my panelists an opportunity for final thoughts, but probably I will pose a question to also add into your final thoughts. Uthman. PwC is very good at doing budget analysis every time after budget speeches. If you look at the recent budget, estimates from the region, they show we are still significantly depending on significant share of foreign external sources of financing. What fundamental changes do you think the governments or the region can do to increase ability to self-sustain in terms of financing our budgets? But you can respond to that, plus any final thoughts.
Thank you very much. Two quick ones. One is to be less wasteful in public expenditure in terms of the cost of public administration, which has gone crazy. The second thing is stop being wasteful when doing capital projects, which we lose a lot of value because a project can take up to 10 years to get off the ground. The second aspect of that is to broaden the tax base. Our tax authorities in some cases have been guilty of trying to go back to the same taxpayer for more and more and more. And in an environment of international investment, that simply doesn't fly. We have some proposals that are quite frankly not sustainable. We already have extremely high tax rates for a very poor region, and we simply cannot promote saving and investment. By the way, we talk about investment, and we look, a lot of people come from outside to invest. But we have a significant level of local investment, which we can't even measure. But that's already coming out of tax income. So broadening the tax base is also critical. Thank you. In terms of general thoughts, in terms of the session, I think, I like the thought around involving the youth in this dialogue. The biggest question for me for the East African community is, when do we get that bite? If the EU passes a law or regulation, you can never break it without serious consequences. What is stopping us from getting that bite so that the East African community can actually be effective within the current set of rules and regulations and laws that we have? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Was it Fiona who said earlier in the morning probably should use litigation as an approach to enforce implementation of some of those? Sanjay, your reflections, but specifically, what do you think could be the role of financial sector, banking and other financial services in shaping trade and investment in the region? Are there some probably innovations in financial service delivery that can help increase the level of trade and investment within East Africa, but between East Africa and the rest of the continent?
I like this because when John was in Trademark, he was the main guy who was talking to us about, what you need to, all the challenges and the opportunities. So from financial sector, I think everything in trade is very part of our ecosystem. There is the traditional products that we provide around financing, which is loans, and then a lot of trade financing. But what is critical now is the role of the financial institutions in providing information. I think there are many organizations like ourselves, Standard Chartered, that can really optimize on the network. So we have a big strategy called Lifting Participation, and we want to take 500,000 businesses, largely from Africa, to become part of the global world. We say resetting globalization. In the past, global businesses used to come here, but now we as bankers want to take them out because we have the leverage of cross-border relationships. I think the other thing is fintech. It's been talked plenty times, but if you bring in, the whole ecosystem around, whether it's e-commerce, blockchain, artificial intelligence, the financial institutions can really drive the speed at which trade can happen, but also reduce the cost, which is critical. I think the third thing is voicing where the costs of trade is becoming big. That's why I said, if we can settle transactions within East Africa, you don't use the route of MasterCard, Visa card, SWIFT, which sometimes can cost us 12 to 17%, and we can settle small transactions here. The last thing is a couple of other things. One is the optimizing on the African monetary management. There's an East Africa Monetary Council. There's also the East Africa Development Bank. Afri-Exim is here. There's Africa Development Bank. So how do we build Africa for Africa using financial institutions which are better at risk management. So how do we create that protocol? And I think finally is aligning to, I don't want to say national priorities, but regional priorities, so East African priorities. My last final thoughts, I think today's session is about private sector. And when it's about private sector, you walk the talk. Every day it's about walking the talk. You have very strong KPIs, you have to deliver. So I hope everybody has KPIs. The second thing is it's business. If you don't know it, don't be in the game. I said this before. And I think lastly, it's about everybody should demand the return on investment one is creating. And I think the simple formula is whatever you're being paid, if every year you're not generating 20x of this, then you still have to learn. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay. Thanks a lot. Annette, your final thoughts, but as EAC, we are very proud of the fact that our region is one of the most integrated regions in the continent. Now, with the advent of AFCFTA, how do you envision the region to position itself to be able to harness this very transformative opportunity to increase the level of intra-Africa trade?
Thank you. I think the first issue is around harmonization. Harmonization, and it was mentioned by the keynote speaker, harmonization of trade policies to ensure that across the region, the policies are similar and implemented in the same way. This process has already started, and the region has adopted an implementation strategy. I think the most important aspect is how that strategy is being implemented or will be implemented on particular aspects such as standards, and we just heard from the lady express some of the challenges that she experienced. A fundamental point, which I think links to some of the issues that we've had from the floor, is on sensitization and capacity building. I think we need to lift the AFCTA lift it off the page so that our youth, our small businesses, cross-border traders, everyone understands what is these protocols. Many of the campaigns that we've had on sensitization have been very technical to try and interpret the articles of the protocol, but we are not being practical. Bringing sectors together of potential, discussing important questions around what are the issues that impede them from accessing that market, and devising solutions to address those challenges, and hand-holding, moving along with them to ensure that we can assess whether they are entering the markets or they are not entering the markets, and what do we need to do, what kind of regional policies are required. I think that's going to be very, very, very important. And we are looking at our capacity building programs, our sensitization programs, to ensure that they are tackling the right issues that the different stakeholders need to hear about. Promotion of micro, small, and medium enterprises. We have a strategy for micro, small, and medium enterprises. They constitute the majority of businesses, and we must give them the opportunity to also engage through, for example, the Simplified Trade Initiative that's already in place, disseminate information, share it with them, help them understand where the opportunity lies. Many of us here in the room probably have this information, understand it well, but if we cross the door and ask the person out there what is FCTA, and I doubt that we have many people that will give us a response that we want to hear. So sensitization, capacity building, bringing on these sectors that we just had. And also I think we need to start thinking outside the box. Somebody said to me, you don't need a box actually, you should think with no box at all. But we need to start bringing on board these sectors that we haven't thought about. The movie production that we just had about, to what extent do we have these sectors featuring within the strategies that we are developing for the region, and what plans have we put in place for those sectors beyond developing the strategies. So I think with those few words, we are committed as a Secretariat to continue coordination of our agencies, to continue coordination of partners within the respective countries so that we can tackle all these challenges. And we're taking notes as the discussions progress.
Thank you so much, Annette. To the question from the young man, I'm from Tanzania, and the last government statistics show for last financial year, the fastest growing sector was not mining, was not telco, was not financial services. It was actually arts and entertainment, which is occupied by the young people for what is famously known as bongo movie and music. So yes, I think this is something that we probably need not to ignore. We need to think of arts and entertainment as a sector that needs sometimes low capital. It depends a lot on young people's brain. So it's something that we need to continue conversation. Colleagues, we could go on, but I think this was like a good discussion just to interrogate and start the conversation that is going to continue over the next two days. It was a pleasure having all of you, and thank you for being very attentive, audience.
Thank you.
It tells of a change of times when it is Honorable Victoria Sechitoreko telling you about Diamond Platinum, Kanda Bogoman, and all these kinds of very interesting young people. It means that the times have evolved. When I was a little younger, my mom didn't see those people as business people. It's now good to see her age mates see them as entrepreneurs. How times change. We are way behind schedule, but we have, let me look at, there's one presentation, then after lunch, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 presentations after lunch. What that means is that when lunch comes, I'll give you advice on how to eat to stay alert. But for now, I thought that Lady Fiona Wall would be around, but now that she isn't, I'll take that responsibility for asking Mr. Didas. I think it should be Ngenda Kumana, Chief Executive Officer for Burundi Development Agency, to take his seat, and Mr. Stephen Peter Lako, Ministry of Investment, Republic of South Sudan, Juba, also to come, and John Mnari, Director of Investment, Tanzania Investment Authority, Investment Center, to come. I didn't see the giant that Robert Mukiza is. I don't know if he has sent representation, but I'll ask these to come, and we'll go through a very quick session. After that session, then I will advise you on how to eat to stay alert in a Ugandan afternoon. I'll make that presentation 45 seconds. Gentlemen, take your seats. And then, is there any ladies as well? We've already been told. I don't know why these jobs are never given to ladies. Only the one odd one. Somebody says that they don't give the jobs to the ladies because the ladies stay at home managing them. All right, so the session is entitled Presentations on Investment Opportunities in the East African Community. And I think you will be letting us in, since there are investors here, on what key investment opportunities are in your respective countries. I'm waiting to hear a country that has a TV station that pays news anchors $20,000 a month, and you can tell I'll be running there very soon. Madam, you want to go first for very obvious reasons. We've just had too many men this morning.
Thank you, Samson. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hope Waira. I'm representing the giant Samson was looking for in the room. I'm from Uganda Investment Authority, so I'm representing Mr. Robert Mukiza, the Director General. And in that regard, I pass on his apologies that he's engaged in some commitment somewhere, still promoting investment. Samson said we have 45 seconds, so all protocol observed. And I'll delve right into the promotion. We're telling you about investment opportunities. I shouldn't be saying this. I've been in this arena and I thank my mentor, Professor Maggie Chigozi, who is in the house. The time that's for Professor or for me? The time that we started promoting Uganda and I was learning, we had what we call the East African Association of Investment Promotion Agencies. And we worked together. I think that is where and business in East Africa. Therefore, say Uganda is nice. Burundi will tell me the same. Tanzania will say the same. We are speaking the same language. So indulge with me if I forget and not say Uganda. I'm saying Uganda, but I'm saying East Africa. We've already mentioned that we have 300 million people to access for market. And we are going on to 330. And therefore, we have to rewrite this game of investment promotion. Which opportunities we have? We have everything. Human capital, East Africa has, Uganda has. And I'll continue smiling because the Prime Minister says we smile a lot, and I think I have a good smile. Anyhow, investment promotion in Uganda is primarily done by Uganda Investment Authority. If I'm here and Mr. Mukiza doesn't hear anything about UIA, I think I might not have a business card after this. But Uganda Investment Authority, like other investment promotion agencies, promotes and facilitates investment and attracts. And we all know that. But most importantly is how do we package and what have we packaged for you, investors in the house. First of all, I re-engineered my presentation. I had the usual. I had agriculture, agro-processing, mining, and these are investment opportunities. Now, there's a sector that we are seriously going to look at, youth. We're not going to look at youth as people only. We are going to look at them as a sector. So within that, we have sectors like agro-processing, and now it has been digitalized. We have commercial agriculture. We have mineral beneficiation, that is adding value to our minerals. If you might know or might not be aware, where you're sitting, there are lots of minerals. But don't start standing up and digging up the place. Anyhow, we have oil and gas and energy as investment opportunities. And this particular sector, which is ICT, Information Communications Technology, is a sector that we are going to look at, especially for the youth and the women. At Uganda Investment Authority, we have packaged this and we have information for you. Bankable, what we call bankable or investable projects as investors, as business people in the room. One, we have instant soluble coffee. We're also making one for tea. But we have an opportunity to have an instant soluble coffee plant in the country. You've just heard from His Excellency the President promoting the cotton and textile sector. So we have a project that is an opportunity for you to invest in cotton and textile processing. Another packaged project is fruit, a fruit factory. We have an opportunity, an investment opportunity at the Luero Fruit Factory. All the figures and feasibility studies have been done. We have opportunities as Uganda Investment Authority, and especially in the industrial parks, that is infrastructure development. We have put together, or government has mandated Uganda Investment Authority to establish 22 industrial parks. And I'm glad to mention that Uganda Investment Authority will be taking a few of you to go and see what we have in place tomorrow in the afternoon. As part of your sightseeing of Uganda, you're going to look at what we have in the industrial park, and I would like to thank Roofings Limited for accepting to receive our delegates. Please sign up and come and see what our anchor projects like Roofings Limited have to show for our industrial parks. And with that, you're going to see the projection of how many industrial parks we are going to set up as Uganda, and this is an investment opportunity. Recently, the president launched and opened up 34 factories in the Mbale Industrial Park. So there are many other opportunities that investors I see in this room are going to be able to invest in. I know we are between our presentations and lunch, but one quick opportunity that I would like to put across for the ESC is to put a mystery shopper. A mystery shopper for the global, in fact, this is going to be a regional value chain. Why would a neighboring country stop a product from another neighboring country? If we had a value chain, Uganda produces, Kenya manufactures, Rwanda does something, there would not be that blood clot in the investment value chain. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to start this discussion. I think I've taken 50 seconds, and with those few remarks, I will say I will stop here. Otherwise, I can market East Africa as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is John Matthew Mnali. I'm the Director of Investment Promotion from Tanzania Investment Center. I'm representing Mr. Gilead Iteli, who has been assigned the other duties. Otherwise, he was the one who was supposed to come. I'll go straight to my presentation. Tanzania Investment Center, like any other IPA, we have three main roles. Our first role is to attract investments into Tanzania. The other one is to assist investors to obtain various permits, approvals, and licenses through a one-stop center. And the other one is to advise the government on all matters related on investment climate in Tanzania. In terms of investment opportunities, of course, we have a number of investment opportunities, but priority has been given in the manufacturing sector, particularly establishment of projects that will use locally available raw materials. So this one ranges from agriculture, where we need projects which intends to add value to a wide range of agricultural crops we produce. Another area is in the mineral processing, because we have different types of minerals, so we would like to attract investors who will be able to add value to minerals produced in Tanzania instead of selling in its raw form. Likewise, in fishing and fish processing is an area that we are targeting investors into that area. Another area is in the area of wood and engineered wood products. This is also a sector which we are looking for potential investors who will be interested to add value into this area. Another area is in the area of oil and gas. particularly in downstream, whereby we attract investors who will be interested to establish CNG, LNG, and establishment of petrolyzer projects. But apart from these ones, we are also targeting investors interested in the area of pharmaceutical, because currently we are spending a lot to import pharmaceutical and medical devices from outside Tanzania. So we are looking for potential investors who will be able to produce pharmaceutical and medical devices in Tanzania. But apart from these sectors, as I've said,
Smart 24, driving